Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the first episode in a brand new series for the channel, which is Canadian federal election predictions. I've been hard at work over the last few weeks creating a software model that takes in polling data, provincial voting intention polls that are broken down, voting intention polls that are broken down by province, by sex, by age, and by education level. I don't have the same number of polls for each of them, but those are my three main criteria. I'm in the process of getting by income levels and first language spoken at home. My limiting factor on both of those two is not actual writing data, it is enough polling data to have balanced polling. For example, I can only find one pollster right now, Angus Reid, that will release income voting intentions. So until I can find another pollster that is releasing the voting intention by income distribution, I can't use that because one pollster would skew only using one pollster for an entire demographic section would skew the model. So until I can find other data points for that, and if anyone in the comments can point to me a relatively recent poll, I'm only accepting polls that have been released since the Conservative leadership race because the leader of a party matters a lot. I guess unfortunately, I won't be able to do the same thing for the Green Party just because, I'm not going to wait 3 months to start talking about, or 2 months to start talking about this, because it would take about a month to get enough data for me to feel comfortable with the model, and it's going to take a month before the Green leadership election is. So unfortunately, they are probably disadvantaged by this in the short term, which possibly explains the deduction to one seat. But we will see going forward if there's a subsequent bump following this. But that's all said. In a different video, I will go through the methodology of the model, but here I'm just going to talk about what we see in the results. So this is in comparison to 2019. It's not easy to see here. I mean, you can kind of see because the Liberals have taken a seat in Alberta in this model, but Alberta and Saskatchewan are much, I guess technically speaking, it's much less safe for the Conservatives, but yes, these provinces are about 5 points less safe, but we are talking about going from Saskatchewan 64 to 59, and from Alberta... Alberta went from 69 to 59, but I will say, I think particularly in Alberta's case, I think polling is just terrible. I think pollsters really do a bad job at polling Alberta. Like, you see pollsters frequently polling Conservatives in Alberta below 50%. Ledger does it, Abacus does it, they all do it. Like, most of them do it. And the last time there was a federal election where the Conservatives got below 50%, or equally right-leaning parties, was 1968. There's been no major trends, there's been no movement that would suggest that Alberta would have such a huge 20-point swing as you saw in the last Ledger poll where they were polled at 49, or the last biggest poll where they're polled at 42. There's been no evidence of anything that would suggest a huge 27-point swing from the Conservatives in Alberta. Equally, you get similar in Saskatchewan, but I think it's a smaller magnitude, about like 10 points. Now, this all said, this doesn't actually really affect the Conservatives' seat count significantly because these two provinces are so overwhelmingly conservative right now that even losing, in Alberta's case, 10-point margin hardly affects anything, losing one seat. But I think it is important to be said. This is, I think, why you see this time and time again tendency in the polling that the Conservatives are underestimated in Canada, because I think pollsters do a really bad job in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Mostly Alberta. Alberta, they do terrible. Saskatchewan, they're closer. Overall, they're closer, but I still think they do a pretty bad job. Now, that all said, the province where I think they've done the worst job polling, that is British Columbia. Now you'll see right here that British Columbia's in this. Oh, I guess the numbers aren't. I didn't write the numbers for these labels, but this lightish color, this lighter blue, or sorry, that's red. This lighter red means the Liberals have less than 40% of the points. This darker red is they are between 40 and 50. This darker red is between 50 and 60. And this darkest red, which is not on the map, is more than 60. And the same follows through with all of these. So this column, less than 40. This one's 40 to 50. This one is 50 to 60, and this one is 60 plus. So Saskatchewan and Alberta are still. I've rounded them up to 60 plus. They're technically 59, but I think putting them in the same color as, or sorry, the 59 to 60 50 to 60 category would be a miscategorization, because I think they're underpolled. And my model does try to adjust for polling errors, but I think that the polling error is just so great that my model still doesn't adjust for it. I'm not revising the seat count, spit up my model though, because I think it is perfectly within the realm of reason that Alberta could go 64% Conservative and the Liberals could sneak out a seat. The NDP sneaked out a seat with 69% of Alberta voting Conservative. So I think it's well within the realm of reason. But the place where I think we're seeing the worst polling right now is British Columbia. For some reason, we're getting poll after poll, particularly from Ledger, but other companies too, that has the Liberals leading British Columbia by a huge margin. The Conservatives decimated, and I just don't understand. It's time and again. So they are just mispolling in the same way, I think. I think if we see an election following this throne speech, which is not impossible, based on Singh's recent comments, but that's not for this video, I don't think you'll see, because I have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure this is having. Oh wait, no, I can check this right now. Give me Yeah, we see here. So British Columbia is at 34.5 for the Liberals and 33.5 for the Conservatives. I don't see that happening at all. I think the Conservatives will lead, and that all said, actually, the Conservatives are not predicted to lose any seats, even in that regard, which is rather amusing to me. But I think British Columbia's been really mispolled, and I think it's getting a bit better. The last couple polls, like some Abacus polls, have been showing, I think, Conservatives leading in British Columbia around the same margin they normally lead. The same comfortable Conservative margin in British Columbia, same with other companies, including paywalled ones, so I can't really disclose the specific numbers on a public video like this. That would be a breach of subscriber agreement. But this is really nothing new. British Columbia is really fickle at polling. Either that or pollsters are really bad at polling. I suspect it's the latter. I suspect you're getting a lot of people polling the Greater Vancouver area, and you're not seeing people poll the rural parts of British Columbia very well. Because if we look in, I believe it was the 2013 British Columbia election, so 2 elections ago, the British Columbia Liberal Party, which is a center-right party in British Columbia, for those not familiar, that was being pulled like 6 points below the British Columbia NDP, and they ended up winning by like 4 or 5 points for a majority government. So, and equally, 2019 election, the Conservatives were polled below their final result in British Columbia by a good margin. So it is a fickle place to poll, and I also think it is just further example of the bad polling. And I think that's possibly why Alberta, you see the polling so poorly done, because poll, they probably overwhelmingly poll Calgary and Edmonton, is probably where the vast majority of people are, and those are much more favorable to the Liberals and NDP than the rest of Alberta. I say much more favorable because, like, Calgary, for example, is like 50%, is greater than 50%. I think it's like 55% of Calgary voted Conservative last election. And the election before that, it was very similar. Like in 2015, when Justin Trudeau comes in with this big red wave and sweeps all these places, Alberta still voted 59.5% Conservative. So like these people who are, these pollsters who are reporting numbers like 49, 42, they're completely wrong. They're completely wrong in Alberta. And like they get a bit of like, yeah, the sample, standard, the margin of error is greater on these smaller samples. But I'm sorry, there's no sample that you can make where your margin of error is going to take your 42% result and return close to a 60% result. Because if Alberta gets less than 60% in the next election, I'm deleting this channel. I'm completely wrong about Canadian politics, and I shouldn't speak on anything. Now, if we move eastward, where for the Liberals, the election is won or lost because they've already lost the West, more or less. And frankly, the Liberals don't need the West, which is the perennial problem of this country. You have a very stark east-west divide, and one party, of the two major parties, the Liberals just don't seem to try. They do not seem to try to get the West vote. They try a bit in Greater Vancouver area and Winnipeg. But outside those two big cities, they don't try. But moving into Ontario, sadly, I don't have a riding by riding map, which is really where you'd see some of the changes. I'm in the process of developing this, but my model is not playing nice with the libraries that I'm using, so work in progress. One day that will be here. In the meantime, we're going to be using this kind of format, and for legal disclaimer, this is a Creative Commons license edit of this map. License description is in, or licensing details are in description, which is legal requirement. What I'm doing is I've edited this. This is for those of you who are aware, this is like the common Wikipedia political maps, and I used this as the common base because, one, kind of interesting play, and it's normally what you see when you look at like Wikipedia or something. So, and it only requires me coloring a few boxes, so it's a lot easier than doing a riding by riding map. So, moving into Ontario, we see the Conservatives are getting a bit of a swing. They're getting a bit of momentum. They're up, in this projection, they're up 3 seats and Liberals are down 3, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if they can continue carrying this momentum in the GTA, I think there is a lot of potential that the Conservatives could get somewhere in Ontario, narrow the seat gap, because if they can narrow seat gap in Ontario, that's the easiest way to swing the election. And that's really going to be the easiest way to swing elections for the foreseeable future. Ontario's 38% of Canada. It's actually only like 34% of the seats or something like that. But until the rest of Canada has more people, and Ontario's not such a big province with such an overwhelming amount of seats, it's going to be where you need to play to win the election. Like, I guess it's hypothetically possible you could win if you swept all of the Maritimes and all of the West. but it would be a very ambitious thing because, frankly, not even all of Alberta and all of for, British Columbia is a great example. Not even all of British Columbia votes the same way. So it's ambitious to think you can sweep everything but Quebec and Ontario, which would only give you about 39 seats, but 39 seats is theoretically enough to win an election. At least in this regard, if Ontario and Quebec didn't get all won by one party. But yeah, so we swing back over to this Excel sheet. This is the actual raw data that underpins the colors on the map. As you can see, the Atlantic is very liberal, though the Conservatives are doing better in it than they did last election, but also the Liberals are. It's really the NDP who suffered here. Green Party's lost a bit of vote too, because the Green Party was polling at like 10% was getting around 10% in the Maritimes last election, but they've been polling lower, and oftentimes, so my model does, anyone who's looked at a lot of polling data would know that my model with these national numbers here has the Conservatives, Liberals much higher than other aggregators like 338 Canada, for example. I have my Liberals and Conservatives higher than his, my NDP and my Green Party lower. That's because I've noticed a tendency for these NDP and Green Party to overpoll. I think the overpolling is not pollsters per se getting it wrong. I think it is when NDP and Green supporters are in the ballot box in these marginal ridings where the Green Party and NDP guy doesn't have a chance at winning, they strategically vote instead. So I guess the way to phrase this is like you'll see, for example, GTA suburbs like King Vaughan riding, which is a big swing riding right now, which the Conservatives currently have flipped in my model. The Conservatives and Liberals get like 45% of the vote count there. And I don't think that is because for that riding has very little NDP and Green support or People's Party support. I think what happens is in that riding, many ridings too, this is not just this one riding, but I think that riding is a good showcase. I think you end up seeing a lot of these people who nominally would vote NDP or Green or People's Party or an alternate party, that seventh party, if you will, choose not to vote that way, and they vote instead for one of the two major parties because spoiler effect, basically. So like if you are center right and your option is PPC or the Conservatives, but you know the PPC can't win, you might vote Conservative instead in that riding because you'd rather a Conservative win than a Liberal kind of thing. But so my model has them lower because I'm expecting strategic voting. Because if you look at past elections, the NDP Greens are often overestimated in the polling. And I think that is really because when it comes down to it, they get in the ballot box and they're like, I'm going to hold my nose and vote other party because I can't. My guy doesn't have a chance of winning, and I don't want this other dude to win. So, yeah. So I think overall here, like Quebec, there's not been any movement. There's not been any movement to Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI. New Brunswick had an interesting situation where Fredericton has flipped for the Conservatives, barely. I think if the Green Party recovers its polling position, it was prior to. It wasn't like 2019 election. They would get Fredericton back, but if they stay around this 5% number, I'm pretty sure Fredericton won't. Will go Conservative just because the vote splitting between the Liberals and the Greens on the left wing. We'll let the Conservatives creep up the middle there. Quebec's been completely stationary, which is interesting because actually the Conservatives are having a big boost in support, and the Bloc is kind of losing support. Like if we look here back at these numbers, the Bloc over the last couple of weeks has actually lost like 1 or 2 points of support in the aggregate here, and the Conservatives have gained about 2 points. So the Liberals have also gained support as well, I should note. But that hasn't actually led to any seat changes in my model. 338 model, for the record, does see the Conservatives gaining some seats in Quebec. Even though his model has the Bloc even stronger than my model, which is quite interesting. But, I mean, we'll see. He's been 90% correct, and I'm untested, so maybe he's right. But I feel pretty confident in my model. I think the results it has spit out so far are pretty reasonable. And that's why I'm publishing this video. I wouldn't be publishing it if I thought the results were unreasonable. So I guess overall, it looks like the Conservatives, Trudeau, if an election were to happen today as of 12:39 a.m. on September 24th, Trudeau would win a 159-seat minority. So he would gain 2 from 2019. Aaron O'Toole would improve on Scheer's result by 3 seats, and Singh and the Green Party would each lose 3 and 2 seats respectively. And Wilson Raybould, I think that's how you pronounce that name. I apologize if I did it wrong. Is still going to hold her seat, independent of, in spite of Trudeau. This is going to be, the series will be continued update weekly now, assuming I get polling. If there's no new polling that week, I won't update it, but generally speaking, I'm getting 2 or 3 polls a week. Some of them I will reject as a editorial decision. For full disclaimer, I did reject this week's Ledger poll because they were reporting the Liberals leading in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, 37-30, and I didn't want to put that data in my model because I know that's wrong, and that's going to really skew the model. There's no scenario where the combined Saskatchewan-Manitoba results are only 30% for the Conservatives. It's not happening, I'm sorry. You're not going to get high mid-50s for Saskatchewan and 30 to 40 range. Like, the only way you can get balance the high 50s you're going to see in Saskatchewan is if the Conservatives are getting like 20% in Manitoba. Not even. It has to be like less than 20%. And I just don't see a scenario where the Conservatives do not get 50% of, at least 50% of the vote in Saskatchewan. And I don't see a scenario where the Conservatives get like 15% of the vote in Manitoba. Like, if that happens, that would just be wild. Like, that's just not happening. So that poll's been neglected. And that is my editorial decision. Feel free to disagree with it. Now, if you like this video, feel free to like, share, subscribe. Yell at me in the comments for ignoring a Ledger poll, even though Ledger's generally pretty accurate. My editorial decision is that poll was wrong. Probably by no fault of their own. They have a probably just random chance because, I mean, yeah. What's it called? Their confidence their only the results are only in the margin of error 95% of the time. So this is probably that 5% that it's just completely out of the margin of error for Saskatchewan, Manitoba. But I didn't want to throw that in. So I wish you all a good morning or good night, depending on what it is where you are watching this video. So have a good day.